This is supposedly the most famous picture of a real-life alien creature that ever existed, taken in the year 1950 in Texas. This is Billie Eilish's mother, Maggie Baird, and this is an unknown man who's not her husband. Now, there are three possible explanations here. 1. Alien conspiracy cover-up. 2. This guy is just a random dude she met at the bar. 3. Maybe, just maybe, the picture-shopped mustache and unibrow this person has makes them look a little weird, especially compared to the grainy black and white photography of the day. And they could be somebody that she knows. So let's put on our tinfoil hats and dive into the rabbit hole of space hippies and see where it leads us. For decades now, there's always been an intersection between UFO culture and sex. Either way, the universe has a funny way of conspiring to bring people together, even if those people aren't looking to make new friends. But let's go all the way back to the beginning. Almost from the start, sex and UFOs were inseparable bedfellows. The adventure of 23-year-old Antonio Villas Boas on 16th October 1957 in Brazil is probably the most famous case of interstellar intercourse. Antonio was plowing a field on the family farm when the engine of his tractor cut out. At the same time, an object with purple lights descended from the sky. Humanoids in spacesuits emerged from the object and took him into their craft, subjecting him to what seemed like a medical examination. They stripped him, spread a strange liquid over him, and took a sample of his blood. He was left alone in a room for what seemed a long time, until a beautiful, fair-haired woman arrived. She was naked, and Antonio was instantly attracted to her. Without speaking or kissing, they had sex, during which she growled like a dog. Despite his strange circumstances, or perhaps because the alien liquid had Viagra-like properties, Antonio was soon ready for a second helping. Interviewed later, he said, "Before leaving, she turned to me, pointed to her belly, and smilingly pointed to the sky." Before letting him go, his captors gave Antonio a guided tour of the spaceship. Antonio went on to become a successful lawyer and still stood by his story over 30 years later. Equally lurid stories of sexual liaisons with UFO occupants came from the world-famous contactees of the 1950s. Howard Menger, for one, had regular meetings with Marla, a beautiful blonde from space who claimed to be 500 years old. She projected warmth, love, and physical attraction, which he found irresistible. Menger divorced his wife to marry Marla, a.k.a. Connie Weber. From July 1952, Truman Bethurum had many meetings with Aura Raines, the captain of a flying saucer, whom he found to be tops in shapeliness and beauty. Bethurum's wife wasn't so impressed with this queen of women, and cited Raines in her divorce petition. From the late 40s to the early 60s, female contactees, in contrast to today's female abductees, are few and far between. This is more than made up for by the astonishing story of Elizabeth Clarer, who in 1956 fell in love with Akon, a scientist who took her to his home planet, Meton. There he seduced her, saying, "Only a few are chosen for breeding purposes from beyond this solar system to infuse new blood into our ancient race." This smooth talk worked. "I surrendered in ecstasy to the magic of his lovemaking," she wrote later. Clara said their magnetic union produced a perfect and highly intelligent son named Ailing. She was sent back to South Africa alone and died in 1994. As far as we know, her starman and son live on somewhere beyond Alpha Centauri. Rather ordinary tales of contact are thus transformed into heroic fantasies of youthful virility. Antonio Villas Boas claimed to have done what any healthy young man would have done in the same situation. He and Elizabeth Clarer delivered the goods, helping to save an alien race from extinction. Now, while scientists tend to poo-poo stuff like this, the truth is that there is something going on here. That's why there have been so many similar accounts throughout the decades. As far back as the 1950s, the great ufologists of the day, like J. Arthur Ushwal and Donald Keyhoe, dismissed such tales as erotic fantasies or hallucinations brought on by intense UFO experiences. But the fact that the contactees of the 1950s and early 60s were mostly middle class, church-going folk makes this explanation unconvincing. Sex is everywhere in UFO lore. But according to academic ufologists, it is inadmissible in their field of study. Thus, sex and UFOs may be eternally linked in folklore and popular culture, but they don't meet the criteria for serious investigation. Well, when legendary ufologist John Keel began researching UFOs in the 1960s, he was struck by how often women spoke of being raped by aliens and how often young men told him about aliens who had extracted their semen. Keel saw these accounts as genuine memories of terrifying events and thought that the women were genuinely pregnant. As he wrote in his classic work, The Mothman Prophecies, there is something sinister, even evil, lurking behind this extraterrestrial phenomenon. The flying saucer fiends are engaged in a massive biological experiment, creating a hybrid race which will eventually take over the Earth. One of the earliest cases of alleged alien rape was that of Betty and Barney Hill, whose story became the first major UFO case in America. In September 1961, this married couple from New Hampshire claimed they were abducted separately by humanoid creatures who performed gynecological tests on Betty and collected Barney's sperm. Years later, Barney even drew a picture of what he experienced under hypnosis. He remembered the creature as a slim, gray-skinned humanoid with large eyes and a small nose. In the drawing, the creature appears to be holding a hypodermic needle. Many ufologists dismissed the Hills as delusional, but others believed that they were victims of a government experiment involving UFO technology. One reason many ufologists dismissed the Hills is that they could not fit their story into the prevailing model of UFOs as soulless machines driven by robots. At the time, it was generally assumed that UFOs were either secret government projects or alien spacecraft, piloted by robot-like extraterrestrials. The implication was clear. If UFOs were the work of soulless governments or machines, then there was no room for sex, much less rape. Today, of course, the vast majority of UFO believers believe that UFOs are driven by humanoid aliens, typically depicted as gray-skinned greys from Zeta Reticuli. So there is no longer any taboo against sexual encounters between humans and aliens. Indeed, the idea that these greys are having sex with human abductees is commonplace in UFO culture. Moreover, it is no longer enough for these aliens to simply visit us. They must do so in order to breed with humans. In the 1970s, female abductees began telling stories of being taken aboard spaceships, strapped to tables, and inseminated by aliens. The aliens were often described as short, gray-skinned humanoids with large heads and big black eyes. These accounts led to speculation that the aliens were conducting a secret breeding program. Some believers even claimed that the aliens were harvesting human eggs and sperm for use in laboratories on their home planets. It was also common to hear female abductees tell of being impregnated, of the fetuses taken from their wombs, and of later being shown their hybrid babies in a nursery on a flying saucer. Stories like these inevitably led to accusations of hysteria, delusion, even fraud. But believers insisted that these were not fantasies, but traumatic memories of horrifying experiences. As for the children, well, most ufologists ignored these claims completely, regarding them as too sensational to be taken seriously. However, there's definitely something going on here. But before we move on to the next segment, now let's get back to that grainy photograph from 1950. The photo was published in Flying Saucer Review magazine, which was run by a man named George Adamski, who was a prominent UFO researcher at the time. According to Adamski, the photo was taken by a man named F.W. Lancaster, who claimed to have seen a UFO land near his ranch in Corona, California. When he investigated, he found the crashed craft and a beautiful woman inside. After being stunned for a moment, the two men talked for a while, after which she disappeared. I mean, why would someone fake something like this? And if she did disappear, why didn't the man try to follow her? Sure, he was 80 years old, but maybe adrenaline would have kicked in. Also, if this is fake, why hasn't anyone come forward and admitted to faking the photo? Like, think about the guy who faked the moon landings hoax. All these years later, people are still talking about it, and he's still receiving death threats. It doesn't seem very likely that somebody would want to be remembered for faking a picture of a hot chick climbing out of a UFO. Now, it could be that Billie Eilish's mother and this other guy were indeed lovers. Maybe the photoshopping is just a cruel joke played on the dead. But there's another possibility. What if this picture isn't of some hot babe emerging from a UFO, but rather an unidentified woman who may have been related to the mysterious flying things in one way or another? We don't know exactly how the photo got to George Adamski, but if he was contacted by this woman's husband or boyfriend, then it's plausible that they asked him to Photoshop her face. The reason? To protect her identity. I mean, it's not like cops would do that for her. Adamski was a UFO believer and might have been discreet. Of course, this is all conjecture, but there's certainly more going on here than meets the eye. So what's the lesson here? Don't trust your lying alien babysitters. Thanks for watching. Are you subscribed yet? Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Characteristics. Some researchers are aware of intriguing similarities between the lore of witches and fairies and modern abduction reports, and nocturnal sexual encounters with supernatural beings of all types can be found in most cultures to the present day. In the past, hundreds of men and women confessed, not always under torture, to sexual intercourse with demons. Some shape-shifting demons were said to lie with a man as a succubus to obtain sperm, and then, as an incubus, impregnate a woman with it. Ufologists, in particular, have been aware of the structural similarities between accounts of fairy and alien encounters. A recent study by James Pontilillo compared 15th-17th century accounts of sexual relations with demons to 20th century encounters with aliens and concluded that both traditions expressed a fundamental fear of female sexuality, but today the male body and mind are just as likely to be under attack. Communion author Whitley Strieber famously described being sodomized by a narrow, furfed, 0.3 long alien probe. He felt that while inside him, it seemed alive and was surprised on its removal to find it was a mechanical device. In my own research, I have interviewed Martin Bolton, who had visions of and telepathic communications with 3 young space women. On behalf of these entities, he window shopped for female attire and watched porn films. They were the goodies. The baddies beamed pain to his brain and for a 3-year period stretched his penis during the night. On several occasions, they afflicted him with phantom pregnancies. Ridley Scott's movie Alien, 1979, dramatized the nature of the alien sexual assaults. The proof of their inhumanity is that they don't always differentiate between the sexes or even between species. Historian David Jacobs, who offers accounts, in his book, of abductees compelled to have sex with fellow victims while aliens watched, speaks for many who believe that the apparently spontaneous experience of abduction by so many different people implies the phenomenon really exists as an objective threat. Yet Rogerson has demonstrated that most of the elements of the abduction narrative appeared together as early as 1967 in The Terror Above Us by Malcolm Kent. This science fiction novel anticipated such ufological themes as the Oz factor, the sensation of being transported to a different reality, the supernatural cold, the doorway amnesia, the informant cannot remember what went on inside a room after entering, the alien in disguise, and impersonal scientists experimenting on humans. For good measure, the story also includes a male protagonist having his genitals examined before sex with an alien female. Another critic of the hybrid breeding idea is British ufologist Peter Brooksmith, who compared the described activities of the alien doctors with the procedures used by terrestrial fertility specialists. He found that the alien inseminators singularly fail to take their subjects at the premium time for egg removal. namely within 48 hours of ovulation, and the aliens are just as likely to be confused by missing fetuses as are humans, given the general difficulty of diagnosing pregnancy within the first 8 weeks. For all their cosmic superiority, the alien inseminators can make pretty elementary and farcical errors. Aliens inserted a long needle into Betty Andreasen's navel. They said their purpose had to do with creation and were puzzled to find something missing. Andreasen had to explain to them that she'd had a hysterectomy. Whatever the genesis of such reports, we have to consider that folk have reported sexual contact with all manner of supernatural beings throughout history. Either the aliens have been conducting their beastly experiments for millennia, or such stories meet some deep-seated socio-psychological need. Until any solid medical evidence is provided, the latter hypothesis seems the more likely.